Loud. Jack, unmute and speak. Jack, you're still muted, and the hits just keep on coming. Oh. Speaking for Jack tonight
All right.
there he is. Okay.
Good. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular third Wednesday Vesper service of the UU Multiracial Unity Action Council. We embrace all who come with a spirit of worship and invite you to remain after the service for a conversation. I'm Jack Reich. We begin with the lighting of our chalice, which Matthew will perform. Let this light symbolize for us the brightness of the truths that guide us.
There. I guess I'm on now. Yes. Well, our next service will be on the topic of beloved community with Reverend Denise Tracy, who is in the house with us tonight. Welcome, Denise. As you can see on your screen, I hope, you can get the Zoom link from Richard Trudeau at this address, Richard 3 with the number 3 at gmail.com. Here's a power user tip. It's that because he is a math professor and it was supposed to be pi, 3.14159, but they wouldn't let him do it. So it's Richard 3 at gmail.com. And for past services, you can go to uumuac.org, scroll down the link for our third Wednesday Vesper services. And while you're there, why not buy our books? We have our first book, Toward Multiracial Unity, Fighting Neo-Racism in Unitarian Universalism, which is a collection of articles from our journal, the Mac Arrow. And then we have our newer book, Neo-Racism from Jim Crow to White Supremacy Culture, by our founder, the late Reverend Dr. Finley C. Campbell, as edited by a team from UMIAC. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back to Jack for music. Jack, you are muted.
And here I am carrying on. Our opening hymn tonight is by Jim Scott, Gather the Spirit. It's number 347 in your hymnal if you happen to have it handy. And now, having practiced this, I think I'm going to get it started.
This is the vision of the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council. We envision our congregations, associations, and communities as not being color blind, but color appreciative, as judging and treating people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin, their cultural heritage, or other identity, and as treasuring diversity in the context of Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community. We call this multiracial unity. And this is the goal for the unity of the light and dark-skinned people of the world. Thank you.
I want to introduce to you this evening's speaker, who many of you already know, Todd F. Eklof, Doctor of Ministry, has been a Unitarian minister since 1999 and founded the North American Unitarian Association, NAUA, in 2023. Additionally, he worked for 16 years in television news and corporate video production. His diverse professional background is complemented by academic degrees in philosophy, communications, religious studies, and ministry. He's also been a certified member of the American Philosophical Practitioners Association, APPA, since 2004. Todd currently lives in Spokane, Washington, with his spouse of 37 years, where he is minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. And now a brief reading, after which we will have 1 minute of silent meditation. This is by Reverend Scott Alexander. It's titled, "We Need a Religion." In a world with so much hatred and violence, we need a religion that proclaims the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In a world with so much brutality and fear, we need a religion that seeks justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. In a world with so many persons abused and neglected, we need a religion that calls us to accept one another and encourage one another in spiritual growth. In a world with so much dogmatism and falsehood, we need a religion that challenges us to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. In a world with so much tyranny and oppression, we need a religion that affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. In a world with so much inequity and strife, we need a religion that strives toward the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. In a world with so much environmental degradation, we need a religion that advocates respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. In a world with so much uncertainty and despair, we need a religion that teaches our hearts to hope and our hands to care. And now let's have a minute of silent meditation. Now we have another hymn. This is We Laugh, We Cry, a wonderful hymn by the late Shelley Jackson Denham. If you have your hymnal, it's number 354. Okay. Uh-oh. I must warn you, I had it queued up in YouTube, but YouTube decided to throw in a commercial. So I'll see if I can get rid of the advertisement.
Actually removed my eye bags and rings.
We are a gentle angry people, and we are.
Well,
We laugh, we cry, we live, we die, we dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom just to have some time alone. But most of all, we need close friends we can call very own. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a need to be together. We have our hearts to give, we have our thoughts to receive, and we believe that sharing is an answer. I seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We search for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of what we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found our joy being together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question truly is an
Jack, you're muted. I believe it's time for our sermon.
yes. Todd, you may begin.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. Sorry it took me a little time to get in later than I was expecting. But the good company and the music has calmed me down. So you never heard a preacher cuss the way I cussed when I found out my internet was out 20 minutes before this meeting was supposed to start. But nevertheless, I'm feeling much better now. So thank you all for having me and for allowing me to talk about Unitarianism and the birth of humanism, a subject that's very dear to my heart, and because of my own ethics and belief system. So I'm happy to share it with you tonight. Firstly, I would say that there is a philosophy called humanism that emerged in the 20th century that is well explained in the Humanist Manifesto published in 1933. Its first two sentences state, the manifesto is a product of many minds. It was designed to represent a developing point of view, not a creed. Now, this has a nice ring for us non-creedal Unitarians, which should not be surprising given that 15 of its 34 signers, almost half of them, were Unitarians, including John Dietrich. John Dietrich was the minister of our congregation here in Spokane from 1911 to 1916, and he went on to become known as the father of religious humanism. Humanism is one of only two major Western philosophies to have emerged in the United States, the other being pragmatism. Its founder, John Dewey, was also a signer of the Humanist Manifesto. And I won't go into the contents of the manifesto since this is not the humanism that I want to talk as much about today. But its original 15 explanatory statements, which are mostly regarding religious humanism, are worth being reminded of and can readily be found online if you're interested. I mention it now because it seems to me that this is what most people today think humanism refers to, including most Unitarians who should know better, but don't. And I believe the reason we don't is because the Unitarian Universalist Association and many of the ministers that has credentialed over the years have resented this core tenet of our liberal religious heritage and have failed to talk much about it in our congregations, hoping to replace it with what philosopher Harry Frankfurt calls bullshit. And I'm referring to the dilution and supplanting of our tradition with nonsense. Nonsense borrowed from other religions and beliefs that accept fantastical and impossible ideas about history, the world, and reality. Frankfurt says, it is just this lack of connection to a concern with truth, this indifference to how things really are, that I regard as the essence of bullshit. Now, I know that's not a very UU thing of me to say, but it is a very Unitarian thing for me to say. The first bylaws of my congregation in Spokane, for example, adopted shortly after it was established in 1887, state, the authority of its belief is reason. The method of fighting its beliefs is scientific. Its aim is to crush superstition and establish facts of religion. Back then, Unitarians knew what our religion was about and what it stood for, no BS about it. But over the years, I've often heard people, including visitors to our churches, ask, isn't Unitarianism that religion that believes in everything? No, I say, it's the religion that doesn't believe in much of anything. I think this confusion, even among many Unitarians, is an unintended consequence of the 1961 merger of Unitarianism and Universalism. In my book, The Gadfly Papers, I write that Universalism has died and been displaced by a grotesque impostor in its place. Unitarianism, though muted, still lives, but must break free of the bonds that now restrain it if it is going to survive. And it has been since the merger that both of these centuries-old traditions have been increasingly detached from their historic roots and distinctiveness. Universalism, a religion once defined by its belief in the universal brotherhood of mankind and the universal love of God, has come to mean, at least within the UUA, the simple acceptance of all religions, and nowadays just about any nutty idea one claims to hold. Questioning it can get you canceled. Unitarianism, on the other hand, has been increasingly muted because of its insistence on dealing with reality and accepting only those ideas that pass the test of science and reason. These days, sadly, anti-rationalism is a stronger force in Unitarian Universalism than its rationalist heritage. Now, to be clear, I identify as a Unitarian, not a Universalist, although there's definitely some blending of those two, right? I mean, Unitarians were the first to create an edict of religious tolerance because of its recognition of our common humanity. But I certainly do not consider myself a UU, not anymore. But I hold no animus towards universalism. And still, some have written to me in defense of universalism, even folks who support me since the publication of my book. And remarkably, they've done so by, guess what? Distinguishing Unitarianism from universalism. And I think that is great. That is my goal, to help rediscover the distinct theological roots and singular qualities of both of these enduring and venerable denominations, and to distinguish them from the new religious movement, the NRM, as researchers call it, known as Unitarian Universalism, which has only existed since 1961 and has become increasingly illiberal and antithetical to the principles its namesakes are supposed to be rooted in, those beautiful principles that Jack alluded to when talking about the kind of religion we need. According to Dietrich's biographer, Carlton Winston, who also happened to be his spouse, his second wife, it was in 1915, while he was still here in Spokane, that he began constantly using the term humanism in referring to his religious belief. David Park, for those who might remember him, he actually came from the Universalist tradition. In his 1957 book, The Epic of Unitarianism, it says that catching the scientific and anti-supernaturalist currents of the day, humanism voiced then as a new world religion for modern man. Its first advocates were Reverend John H. Dietrich in Spokane, Washington, and his best friend, the Reverend Curtis Reese of Des Moines, Iowa. Curtis Reese, actually, like me, came to Unitarianism from the Southern Baptist tradition, and in fact attended the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, where I also attended for a bit. Park's book also says that Dietrich and Reese began preaching humanism in 1913. That's 3 years before he left Spokane. Dietrich came to Spokane in 1911, immediately after having been convicted of heresy by the Dutch Reformed Church. But he was accused of being a Unitarian by one of his parishioners as early as 1905, and deep down he probably was. He got into trouble in college for writing a paper that treated the death of Jesus as merely a human event resulting from his political action, not as an act of atonement for the sins of the world. He also called upon others to emulate Jesus' behavior rather than worshiping him. Sounds like a Unitarian, right? His heresy conviction was partly based on his rejection of the doctrine of atonement. And according to Winston, afterward, when a young reporter at the Spokesman newspaper learned that Dietrich had become a Unitarian, he immediately contacted our church. Winston says, some other church would snap him up, the reporter feared. If the Spokane church did not act immediately, it did. But the rest is not history. Dietrich may have come to us as a Unitarian, came to our religion as a Unitarian, but not as a humanist. Not yet. This evolution in his thinking not only happened while he was here in Spokane, as the evidence proves, which I already mentioned, but I further suggest it was because he came to Spokane, specifically because he came to the Spokane congregation, where his mind and his inclinations were set free by our extraordinarily liberal congregation's fundamental, quote, regard for truth, end quote, based upon reason and science and its complete rejection of superstitious thinking in 1887. in those original bylaws drafted just a year later in 1888. Those bylaws also say that its first principle is freedom of opinion and is subject to no censure for heresy. Imagine that, 1888. In fact, Dietrich was inspired to use this term humanism after reading it in an article on positivism that was mentioned on the back of a book given to him by one of our founding church members. Positivism, loosely defined as the religion of humanity, which the article's author shortened to just humanism, struck a chord with Dietrich. And this age-honored word, Winston writes, would be a good name for his interpretation of religion in contrast to theism. In short, Dietrich came to believe religion ought to be based on the betterment of humanity, just like Jack talked about in that wonderful reading, right? That's what he said. We need to do these things for the betterment of humanity, while theism based its belief on belief in God, theology. That's the beginning of Dietrich's journey as the founder of religious humanism, which a lot of Unitarians caught on to, especially those in the western reaches of the US. However, it wasn't met with complete enthusiasm and actually led to a major controversy in our religion known as the humanist debate. As Reverend William F. Schultz, some of you may recall, a former president of the Unitarian Universalist Association and executive director of Amnesty International, explained in a 2003 editorial, for more than a decade, from 1916, when Dietrich and another Unitarian colleague, the Reverend Curtis Reese, began preaching humanism in their congregations through the 1920s, Unitarians debated the merits of a strictly human-centered, scientifically minded, ethically focused religion. And by the way, it was more than a debate. It got quite nasty. I mean, can you imagine a minister from my congregation here in Spokane causing a nationwide debate within our entire religion? I mean, what are the chances? I'm quite sure nothing like that will ever happen again. So that's a lot of history. And I haven't even gotten to my main point yet. But to get there, it's important to understand the origins of the philosophy called humanism that began in the early 20th century within the much larger context from which it sprang, not only the unflinching commitment to reason and science that our Spokane congregation in particular was founded upon, but the belief in human goodness, human agency, and human welfare that has always been integral to the definition of Unitarianism, dating all the way back to Jesus. I believe Unitarianism is so deeply rooted in and defined by these fundamental principles that it was inevitable that humanism as a formal philosophy would eventually emerge from it. Dietrich may be considered the father of religious humanism, but theologically speaking, Unitarianism is almost synonymous with the term, and always has been. For Unitarianism is essentially the belief that Jesus was human. A human being, not a God, which necessitates a positive belief in his humanity and his humanitarian teachings that put human love and welfare at the center of all our endeavors. That's the humanistic ethic. It should also be remembered that Jesus and his original followers were Jewish, not Christian. Christianity is a religion that did not exist during Jesus' time. So his humanistic message initially existed within the context of Judaism, which is a religion defined by monotheism, like Unitarianism, the belief in only one God. Sometime after his death, non-Jews were also drawn to his teachings, and like his Jewish followers, they did not initially consider Jesus a God, but a wise teacher who gave us some really good words to live by. His original followers had what is called a low Christology, which I prefer to call a humanistic Christology, because a low Christology simply means it emphasizes the humanity of Jesus and his humanistic teachings. Whereas a high Christology rather emphasizes, I should say, the Christ of faith in the belief that he is divine, that he is himself God or a God. And that latter view emerged decades after his death as some of his Gentile followers, who had no cultural or religious taboos about deifying and worshiping a human being, came to consider Jesus a God, whom the Romans called Christ, for which his followers became called Christians. At this point, whether from a low or high, a human or divine perspective, his humanity and his humanistic teachings existed within the context of Christianity. Right? So first within a Jewish context, then a Christian context, but the humanism was still there the whole time. Worshipping him as a God, however, increasingly emphasized his divinity and the preposterous myths about him, while largely disregarding the historical Jesus along with his humanity and his humanistic teachings. Soon thereafter, the original Unitarian belief that there is only one God and therefore Jesus was only human became anathema. In 325 CE, the Holy Roman Empire, having adopted Christianity as the official state religion, established the Nicene Creed, declaring that the Father and the Son are the same person. Half a century later, they added the Holy Spirit to the mix, and Trinitarian doctrine was born: Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And the original Unitarian insistence on Jesus' humanity became heresy. But make no mistake, the Unitarians were here first, by at least 300 years, almost 4. It would not be until after the Dark Ages ended, with the invention of the printing press, that Unitarianism would be rediscovered, and with it the humanity of Jesus. And when this occurred, right, that's when Michael Servetus, during the Renaissance, discovered the humanity of Jesus, questioning the Trinity, for which he was sadly burned alive. So when this occurred, Unitarianism existed then within the context of the Renaissance, which refers to the renewed interest in the pre-Socratic philosophers, going back to 2600 BCE, who were the first thinkers in history who attempted to understand the world, like they were trying in 1887, in natural rather than supernatural terms. And they discovered a lot during just those first few centuries, but they were eventually declared pagans, and most of their writings were destroyed by the Holy Roman Empire, as was about 90% of the writings of antiquity. I mean, it's horrific to think about to this day. Think about the wondrous literature we have from that age, and that there's 90% of it missing. But the Renaissance, 800 years after this literary purge and the silencing of dissenters, countered with what in Latin is called, guess what? The Studia Humanitatis, meaning the study of humanity, including all human writings and teachings, not just those authorized by the leaders of one religion. This is what our liberal arts model of higher education is still based on today, sadly fading away as it is. Today, we refer to this principle as Renaissance humanism, attributed to the 14th century Italian scholar Francisco Petrarch, who rediscovered and printed Cicero's letters, a brilliant Roman philosopher who was not a Christian, yet had many valuable ideas worth considering. For this, Petrarch has been named the father of Renaissance humanism. Renaissance humanism, centuries before John Dietrich and the Humanist Manifesto existed. This is a really important point to grasp, because humanism isn't a 20th century invention that infiltrated Unitarianism, leading to a rift in the denomination, as many UUs now believe. Unitarianism, rather, has always been synonymous with humanistic Christology and its reverence for historical Jesus' humanity, and more importantly, humanitarian teachings. And this has been so going back to the origins of Unitarianism. even if this defining quality endured through different historical contexts, including those I've already mentioned, a Jewish context, a Christian context, and the context of Renaissance humanism, for which Eastern European Unitarianism emerged, or from which it emerged during the 16th century, emphasizing again religious tolerance, freedom of belief, and freedom of the pulpit. It's astonishing to think that Unitarians came up with this that early in history, because of their commitment to this fundamental form of humanism. Unitarianism in this part of the world, our part of the world, or I should say in the Eastern European part of the world, still exists within a Christian context to this day, along with this historic commitment to his humanistic values. Western Unitarianism, our Unitarianism, emerged later during the overtly rational and scientific context of the 17th century Enlightenment, when the ideas and values that emerged during the Renaissance became widespread and were actually put into unfettered practice, leading to the establishment of democracies and other social, scientific, and technological innovations that have made our modern world so wondrous, even though they are under great threat today. Although Western Unitarianism began within the context of a very liberal Christianity, it went through a transcendentalist phase beginning in the 19th century, during which its theological lexicon expanded beyond the confines of Christianity. God was no longer the God of Abraham, but the more nebulous oversoul of Ralph Waldo Emerson. A century later, as mentioned, came the humanist debate, challenging Unitarians to consider whether we need to speak of God in any terms at all, so long as they are devoted to the welfare of humanity, as demonstrated in deeds, not creeds, as we like to say. Another way to put it is that 2,600 years ago, the early Greek philosophers became the first group to collectively rely upon reason, sense, and nature to better ascertain truth and understand reality, relying upon their own human faculties and agencies to do so, which necessitates also valuing human dignity, a belief that is in themselves. They believed in their own humanity. We can figure it out. We don't need myths. We don't need religions. We can figure it out ourselves. And I mean, I'm not going to go into all they discovered, but they went right up to discovering atomic science right before things got shut down, right? Quantum physics, the granular nature of reality. "600 years later, a Jewish sect led by an itinerant preacher named Jesus taught that religion ought to be good for humanity, not humanity for religion, and that this principle is put into practice by treating others as we would ourselves be treated, by sharing our wealth, our resources with one another, by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, caring for the poor, forgiving one another, welcoming the outcast, unclean, and demonized among us, and avoiding violence. All of this is about as humanitarian and humanistic as it gets. As mentioned, this movement's earliest followers were Unitarian in their theology, as are all Jews to this day. But then came a lengthy historical hiccup, the Dark Ages, that squelched this focus on human dignity, human agency, and human welfare for more than half a millennium before it reemerged during the Renaissance. I'm not going to cry over the spilled Milky Way here, but just imagine 800 years of darkness, and look how much we've been able to accomplish within just a few hundred years past the Enlightenment. I mean, imagine what the world would be like now if those pre-Socratics had been able to keep going 2,600 years ago. But that's another sermon. The best example is the formal establishment of the Unitarian religion in Transylvania and its creation again of the Edict of Torda in 1568, the first religious toleration law in human history. I guess we're still all right. I see a screen up, but I see I'm still on. So can I get a thumbs up? Everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Thank you. So yeah, the Edict of Torda in 1568, the first religious toleration law in human history, guaranteeing the freedom to express and choose one's own religion without fear of retribution and punishment. A law based upon freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in its commitment to peace, life, and human dignity. That's the sentiment out of which the Edict of Torda emerged. These Renaissance principles inspired the Enlightenment reformers, resulting in the very first articulation of the humanistic ethic. Now, I'm going to actually back up. This isn't quite true. Really, the first articulation of the humanistic ethic is the Golden Rule, which is universal, right? Because it says we know what is good based upon what we know is good for ourselves, and we know what is wrong based on what is wrong for ourselves. So we need to treat one another accordingly. We're basing our ethics on our own humanity, on our own human experience, and broadcasting out. So that would really be, I think, the first articulation of the humanistic ethic. But during the Enlightenment, it's attributed to philosopher Immanuel Kant, his categorical imperative, the thing that is always true no matter what situations you find yourself in, something that you can always rely upon to help you do the right thing, and that is that no person should ever be treated as a means to someone else's ends, but should be considered an end within themselves. During the French Revolution, it was reframed, as many of us know it today, as the inherent worth and dignity of every person, a phrase included within the founding articles of many democracies. The humanistic ethic was later given a more in-depth explanation with the establishment of the 20th century humanist philosophy, Dietrich's religious humanism in particular, and its humanist manifesto. As the manifesto's 13th affirmation states, religious humanism maintains that all associations and institutions exist for the fulfillment of human life. But these days, I prefer social psychologist Erich Fromm's definition of the humanistic ethic, that the sole criterion of ethical value must be human welfare, and that the unfolding and growth of every person should be the aim of all social and political activities. Human welfare and individual development, that is, ought to be the fundamental aim of all we do. And this definition gets at both the bottom and top half of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, right? The lower half focusing on the welfare of humanity, the basic things we need in order to survive, that everyone needs in order to survive, and the upper half based upon the individual unfolding, self-actualizing, individuating. And for those wondering about other living beings, please do not confuse humanism with anthropocentrism. I'm going to say that again, because I talk about humanism all the time, and I always get this. It's anthropocentric. It's not. It is not. First of all, it is, because ethics are anthropocentric. There's no other animal on earth that we know of that has ethics, right? No other animals ponder what's the right thing or the wrong thing for me to do. Humans do that. And as we do it, we consider our ethical relationships to other creatures that are not humans. So it is a humanistic endeavor. Ethics is a humanistic endeavor. But more importantly, humanism recognizes that we are not separate from our environment, not unrelated to the creatures that we share our world with, and that our health and welfare depends upon theirs. That's the bottom half of Maslow's hierarchy of needs regarding our general welfare. Humanity can't do well if the earth isn't doing well. Humanity can't do well if other creatures aren't doing well. But it also understands that no individual can fully unfold without developing a great love for life. Right? To fully unfold as a human being, we have to unlock and develop our greatest power as human beings, and that is the power to love. And love means nurturing life, respecting life, getting to know life, caring for life. That's what love means. It's not a feeling about life. It's an action and an attitude towards life. So we can't unfold without developing our love for all forms of life and a great capacity to empathize. To become fully human is to have that part of the brain that empathizes with the suffering of all living beings. That's the upper half of Maslow's hierarchy. The humanistic ethic requires us to care for our planet and to care for the other creatures we share it with. Otherwise, we have failed to achieve that ethic. But the point I've been leading to with all of this history is that humanism, in the broad sense, the studia humanitatis sense, is not that it is not a modern interloper into Unitarianism, but has always been integral and intertwined with it. Broadly defined as a belief in human goodness, human agency and dignity, and a commitment to human well-being and flourishing through the social technologies of freedom and reason and tolerance. Humanism has been the one and only quality that has remained constant throughout the different historical contexts in which Unitarianism has existed. A Jewish context, a Christian context, a Renaissance context, an Enlightenment context, a Transcendentalist context, a 20th century humanist philosophy and religious humanism context. So I won't try to give an appropriate name for whatever the hell the context is in which Unitarianism exists today, other than perhaps the term that defined by Harry Frankfurt that I mentioned earlier. But if it is to survive, and if it is to remain worth surviving, if Unitarianism is to survive, and if it is to remain worth surviving, Unitarianism must gaze again upon the North Star that has guided it throughout time and through every storm, lest this historic and revered tradition, unlike any other ever to have existed, really does become just that religion that believes everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I would want to now share with us our offering, which is not passing the plate, but an invitation for you all to perhaps join UMIAC. For our standard membership is $30 a year. You can go to uumuac.org and donate there. We are a nonprofit under the IRS code. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack for our closing words. Jack has to unmute.
Closing words are from Robert T. Weston, who wrote, "Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth. Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery. A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief. Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which eats away the false. Let no one fear the truth, that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief. Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help. It is to the wise as a staff to the blind. Doubt is the attendant of truth." And now we extinguish our chalice Our service is ending. As we extinguish the chalice, symbol of our faith, we recall the words of the late Reverend Elizabeth Sully Jones. Now we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now I have a closing hymn for you. It's the one with which Todd's congregation closes out every service. It's the Jewish folk song, Shalom Chaverim.
Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom. Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom. Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim, Shalom.
Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom. Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom.
Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim,
Shalom Chaverim, Shalom Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom. Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom.
I believe it's now time for our conversation. I'm going to stop the recording. People feel free to speak freely. And don't forget to tune in next month for our next service with Denise Tracy.